Okay, this is just a quick little video talking about the situation you're going to run into as a video question developer, and you're going to run into the situation. So try to start everybody off in situations where you were dealing with just multiple choice questions. Then you could just focus on making good videos, and all of you've kind of accomplished that. And still there's always stuff to learn and comparing with others and asking questions and whatever else. But you're kind of established as video developers at this point. So I think it's time to talk about situations where you run into non-multiple choice questions and what we're going to do about those. So this video is about that. So at some point you're moving along, you finished a section, and I give you a section on that spreadsheet and say, okay, this one you have to attack, but you're going to run into some questions other than multiple choice, which is going to require you to do some question building. And it might be a case that you run into where there's not enough questions in a category or stuff like that as well, and you do a few building ones. And certainly, chatting with Rolly as far as, whether some questions are going to be added here, and he may already have plans for that. But let's just get you familiar with the big picture here a little bit more. Kind of thinking about video development and then thinking about where it fits into the big database as well. So we're in Math 11, and if we open it up, just to get a sense for what these question banks look like. So the goal is to have, and I'm sure you figured out these patterns, but just 2.1 is a lesson on exponent laws. And so what Rolly has nicely done is he said there's 2.1 and then there's 2.1. We'll kind of split it into subcategories: multiply, divide, variables with exponents, and complicated expressions. All of these fit into that one book called 2.1 Exponent Laws. Now, if we look at this, and we talked about categories, we kind of want that 15 to 20 questions in a lesson. But here we can see that within these categories, we basically have 4 subcategories. So really we have 32 questions per lesson. So in the subcategories like this, it may be, 6 or 8 per subcategory, but in the grand scheme of things, 32 is plenty enough, because now we can make quizzes and randomly select. Maybe in a quiz you grab one for each one of these subcategories, and then in the test you grab one from each of these subcategories, and maybe in a final exam you just grab 2 randomly from the whole category itself, from any of the subcategories and stuff like that. It leaves enough questions in there that everything's going to be different one student to the next. With the possibility of a question here or a question there overlap, but certainly not enough that anybody would have a security issue. We look at this 2.2, and in fact we've piles and piles of questions in there, so way more than enough. So getting a sense for what's enough is important as we go down this next stretch, because you're going to have to make some decisions about what gets deleted and whether some new questions have to be added and stuff like that. So if you run into a category that you're kind of, something like this, other applications, and that particular one is sitting empty because Rolly is waiting on me personally. So I was going to be coming up with some ideas for the other application ones, and so he set that one aside for the time being. But if you're working on a category and stuff like that, and you want to point out maybe, seeing one with maybe a couple questions in it per se, feel free to email myself and or Rolly and just kind of say, oh, I just noticed that this one is a bit short on questions. And if one of us comes back and said, oh, okay, great point, we'll have to go back and make sure that we clean that up, great. It may be a case where we ask you, oh, do you mind making a few questions? And if you're comfortable looking at it and adding variations on questions that were there and making a few more, then that's great. But we're all kind of chipping in just to make sure that we have a really, really good database here. The other thing that you're going to run into is non-multiple choice questions. So I happen to know that up in, I don't know, one of these, excuse me, I think these are Fiona's area, but you'll notice that when we look on the left here, we can see that these ones are essay questions, and then all these ones down here are multiple choice questions. And so we're not hugely against essay questions, but we basically, if a teacher wants to use them, then we should split them up ourselves. So originally I was talking about the idea that maybe we just write show your steps in there, which I did with this one. But I think the conclusion we came up with as a group was that let's just do them all multiple choice, and then we can have essay ones as in separate categories if we decide to do that in the future. But for now, let's just make a really good database, make them multiple choice, and make them with the video solutions, and people will be very happy that we have a really nice solid database that's really easily usable by both students and teachers. Now, as far as showing work and stuff like that, that's mostly done in the learning guides and projects, and if we decide to expand on that, we can in the future. But having it all mixed together right now is just causing more hassle than it's worth. So with these ones, what we would be asking is when the person who's working on this one comes in, they would recognize that an essay question is not what we want. So they would stop and they say, okay, we have 10 questions in here. And if I just deleted all those essay questions, well, that would leave me maybe a little bit short in this area. So in 1.2, 14 and 10. So probably would be good to replace at least a couple of these questions. So maybe look at a couple of these questions and say, okay, let's replace this one and this one with a multiple choice. Now, the way to replace it with a multiple choice is to, just grab, one of the ways that I've done it in the past is I would have two screens open and I would make a new multiple choice question. And so to make a new question is just create a question and multiple choice, add. And now, if I have that other question open in another screen, then I could just copy and paste the question name, just paste it over. In other words, assume that you're keeping the exact same name. The question text, I can grab it from there, paste it over. And then the general feedback, I may want to paste that over as a temporary thing until I got my video, or maybe in addition to video, depending on how you're doing it. And then as far as answers, that's the part where you just be a little bit creative. In other words, what are the different ways that people would make mistakes in order to solve this common mistakes, and you just put in some variations. Now, once you've made one of your multiple choices, if you're making like a number of them, one of the little tricks that's worth noting is, I'm just going to go back, is once you've built one, just go down here and for me, when I've been building these, so I spent some time replacing a number of them just to kind of remind myself on the tricks of the trade, so to speak. What I found myself doing a lot was I found myself making maybe 6 different possibilities. In other words, 6 options to choose rather than the 4. But that's not a big deal because once you build that, then you just go and you hit duplicate your question. And now your next question that you're doing, you may go and you say, oh, well, the next one I was doing was going to be 6. And again, you can just change that to 06. And then you can grab, again, if you were able to have 2 screens open, you can grab the question text, paste it over here. You can grab the question feedback, paste it there. And then you may look down here and you say, okay, well, let's just vary some of these. You're going to have the shuffle the choices on generally. And then you just go down here and you just make sure that you add a couple, and if the 6th or 5th and 6th one really aren't even close, well, who cares? They're just kind of deviations to throw off for people who are guessing kind of thing. So then you finish that one, you modify it, and then you duplicate it and call it 07 and just keep working like that. And so that works for pretty well for making multiple choice questions quite quickly. About the only thing that slows you down is when you're stopping and you're thinking, I need at least 3 or 4 that are good variations on things that people might make mistakes on here. So, you know, in this one, I might say if the answer was 10,500, then, you know, I'm going to vary on which one was the right choice. Just in other words, I don't want choice 1 to be the correct one each time. So I'm going to vary it a little bit and change the 100 to none. And this is going to be the right answer this time, 100. And the only reason that we vary it a little bit is if somebody comes along and unshuffles the choices for whatever reason, you don't want people out there to be in a situation where all the answers are C, for instance, right? Like, so in other words, as you go through, change it around, make sure you only have one 100% in there and the rest are off, and you know, throw some variations in there that make sense, that will, you know, catch students that are making common errors and stuff like that. And yeah, that's basically it. Now, in the grade 11, Math 11 course, one of the reasons why a lot of you started there and in the Math 10 databases was because we didn't have a lot of short answer and essay ones. This is one of the rare areas where we found them in the Math 11 course. But as you keep going further and working down, we're going to work backwards a little bit. In other words, you're going to see some more middle elementary kind of courses. And what you're going to find is in there you have more of a mix of types of questions. For example, this one, 53 questions in there. So tons of questions. So deleting a number of those isn't going to be an issue because we still have piles and piles there. So if someone was assigned this area and they were working on addition and subtraction, they would look and they say, okay, let's count how many multiple choice ones I have. Oh, okay, well, I don't have a lot of multiple choice, so I'm going to want to convert at least some of these over. So I take a look through the questions and I say, okay, there's some true and false down at the bottom here, the 2 dots. We can leave true and false because they're just like multiple choice. They're just easier. Well, easier from a guessing point of view. And basically what we would do is we'd identify, and with those 3 and maybe, you know, 5 up here roughly, so 8. Well, we should really convert a few. So let's say we decide to convert 4 out of this section and maybe 4 out of this section and 4 out of this subtraction section. So if we do those subtractions, then that might be not a bad way to go. So again, the rest you can delete, but what you want to do is you want to be able to look back and say, okay, num 11. We have lots of questions in all of these areas, and so for this case, we're just looking at making sure there's a bit of variation in the types of questions we have. So you may end up deciding what we had 8 of them, so you may end up converting, you know, a total of 6 to 8 questions just to give some variation, and then you can delete the rest. And you look at it and you say, okay, well, I have 20 questions here, and you know, that's more than enough to be able to randomly choose. Bottom line is I know they're all right. I know they're all multiple choice or true and false. That's the main goal, and I've got a nice video solution for all the ones where that makes sense. Let's take a look at this one with 15. Okay, so we start off, we have a matching one where, let's take a look at that. Okay, now the one problem with matching ones is, see, this is really, you know, solving 5 different questions and you're just getting 1 mark out of it. So in many ways, it's kind of from a timing point of view and stuff like that, it's not a terribly fair question, in that in order to make it part of a random choice, we'd have to mark it out of 1, like is done right here, where really it should be out of 5. It's 5 questions. But you can't really do that when you randomly choose questions, because you basically, I have to say, it could be one of these regular multiple choice questions, or it could be this one. I can't change the whole scaling of the test based on which one I choose. So by default, I have to make everything 1. So basically this one, now you have the student who is unlucky enough to choose this question or get this question, to spend 5 times as much time on this question and get the same mark as somebody who ended up just doing one of them. So probably not an appropriate question. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete that one. So let's just wipe that one out. All right, so there's step 1 as far as cleaning this one up. Okay, so now we look at it. We have 2 multiple choice, and then all the rest are short answer. So that's a problem. So what we might decide to do is we might say, okay, so I've got multiple choices here, and so that's 2 of them. So I think I'll do up to 8, and I'll just look down. The unfortunate thing is that they vary in difficulty a little bit here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll do this guy, this guy, this guy, a couple of these guys, and a couple of these guys, and then I can convert those over, showing them using the method I showed earlier, and then delete the rest of them. And in the end, I will have 10 questions in here, and that feels nice and solid. So I have 10 questions. They're all multiple choice. They all have a nice video, and they're all perfectly correct. Far better than having 20 that are questionable. So as far as cleaning up these databases, again, going back to the idea that you are now video experts, now I want you to use that video expert, but also you're coming in and you're working with a database. If you, now it's using your discretion a lot in here. So if you run into something where you're like, ooh, I don't feel perfectly comfortable making this decision, no problem. That's great. Ask questions. Fire me an email or fire Rolly an email, and we would be happy to take a look at what you're talking about and just chat about what might be a good decision there. And the more of those you do, the more comfortable you are just jumping in and doing your own thing. In the end, the bottom line is we want a great big database in all of these courses, where every question is multiple choice or true and false, and every question is correct, and every question has a nice video solution. And so, in other words, we're just opening up what your vision of this whole thing is. So anyways, I'll stop there, and would be happy to go get into more of the details as far as making a question or any of that kind of stuff, or if you had any questions about that. But hopefully this kind of gives you a bit of a picture on where we're going. Thank you.